Good evening, you're watching Notepad with Ibrahim Sani, with me Nabila Khalida taking over his show for today since Ibrahim is out for work in Korea. But today is a very exciting day where we're going to talk about Selangor ASEAN Business Conference SABC 2022 with the theme of Selangor Gateway to ASEAN and Beyond, from the heart of Malaysia's economy to the heart of Southeast Asia's economy. And sitting right next to me right now is Dr. San, Senior Fellow, Singapore Institute of International Affairs. How are you, Doctor?
I'm doing okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming to our studio, and I hope you had a good lunch just now.
Well, I certainly did.
Okay, without further ado, let's start with our first question, right? So for the benefit of our viewers who may know ASEAN specifically, can you share more about this conference in general?
Well, of course, ASEAN, as we know, is a regional organization of 10 Southeast Asian countries, and they make up almost a large part of Southeast Asia. Now, some would call ASEAN to be the most economically vibrant region in the world right now, because we have some of the highest growth rates in the world at the moment. And of course, if you compare ASEAN to some other major economies, we are the 5th largest economy in the world. So this is indeed a very dynamic part of the world, with a lot of trade routes from the east to the west or from the west to the east passing through this region. And of course, Malaysia, with both of its parts, West Malaysia and East Malaysia, in a sense, you may call it embracing the whole of Southeast Asia. And right in the heart of Malaysia, you have the state of Selangor, which is one of the major investment destinations in the region. And that's why we are holding this Selangor ASEAN Business Conference, in order to have even more investment for the state of Selangor.
All right, now that you've explained about ASEAN or introduced ASEAN as a whole, so what are the exciting economy areas or business opportunities in ASEAN that you can share to the public out there?
Well, ASEAN has a population of about 600 million, which is a tenth of the world's population. And as I said, this is indeed a very dynamic part of the world. I think some ASEAN economies were growth rate of up to almost 10% this year, as we are recovering from the coronavirus pandemic. You would also see that it is a very ideal location for not only productions, but also the provision of services. Traditionally, I think ASEAN as a whole, and Malaysia in particular, we attracted already a lot of this, for example, production plants and creating a lot of job opportunities.
Yes.
But I think going forward, we will also like to see more services being relocated to ASEAN and being offered out of ASEAN. We are talking about, for example, a lot of consulting services in the high-tech sectors. I think we are also talking about a lot of biotechs, a lot of new energies and renewable energies and so on. So I think going forward, as we are also entering this RCEP, or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is, I think by now, the world's largest free trade agreements, enabling ASEAN countries, Malaysia included, to have free trade with, for example, China, Australia, Korea, Japan, New Zealand, and so on. I think we would hopefully like to expand the horizons of a lot of these ASEAN countries to take advantage of the free tax treatment to expand our businesses here.
Trading, we have tradings, right?
That's right.
We have consumer markets, we have job opportunities. All right, and as a whole, this Southeast Asia can be seen very appealing on papers. But can you share the reality, how Southeast Asia or ASEAN can be unified as a group, and how can they work together to navigate the in terms of business and economic, the reality?
Well, I think the good news is most ASEAN economies, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, and so on, we are already very used to global trade with the rest of the world, with, for example, the United States, the European Union, with China, Japan, Korea, and so on. And we have done a very good job. We are an indispensable part of the global supply chain. But what perhaps we are lacking is very ironically, for example, trade among ourselves. For example, between Malaysia and Indonesia, between, let's say, Philippines and Thailand, and so on. The trade volume for countries within ASEAN is only 1/4 of ASEAN's trade volume with the rest of the world. So we have done very well externally, but perhaps internally within ASEAN, we can encourage more trade. Already we have this ASEAN Economic Community, which is again another free trade agreement, such that within these 10 nations ASEAN setup, we will have reduction or even removal of tariffs or other non-tariff barriers. But of course, sometimes the devil's in the details, right? Again, on paper, it would sound that very nice that we have almost free tariffs and so on. But sometimes on the ground level, you would need all these individual ASEAN countries to really commit to implementing these free tariffs treatments, or to not deliberately erect all these non-tariff barriers. For example, saying, oh, this sort of goods has not gone through some sort of quarantine requirements, veterinary inspections, and so on. We should have a standard for this. For example, if certain food items has been examined in one ASEAN country, it should be recognized by the other ASEAN countries, so that goods could really flow freely among ASEAN countries.
Let's focus on Selangor itself. So since the conference is focusing on the states of Selangor, maybe you can share how Selangor can benefit the ASEAN itself, and how can Selangor be focused on this ASEAN conference?
Well, of course, the conference would indeed focus on Selangor as an attractive investment destination for both within ASEAN and also from outside of ASEAN. I think it's also very important, incidentally, to encourage investments among ASEAN countries. Malaysians investing in Singapore, Thai investing in Malaysia, and so on. Number two, of course, Selangor has long been a huge production base, a production hub for a lot of products, ranging from the more high-end communications, biotech, and various, for example, renewable energy products, to, let's say, our run-of-the-mill food items and so on. And of course, the rest of Southeast Asia welcome to purchase or to import these items. But similarly, I think Selangor can also benefit from the ASEAN Economic Community, from the RCEP and so on, by having raw materials from not only other parts of Malaysia, but other nations within Southeast Asia. Imagine, as I said, your raw materials, let's say from the Philippines, being manufactured in Selangor, and then being exported to the rest of Southeast Asia. So I think we have to look at Southeast Asia not in terms of 10 different countries, but really, as we said, as a single market, as a single production base. And Selangor can take the lead in this regard, because it has already done a good job, a very good job in attracting a lot of foreign investments. Now, foreign investors could also think of taking advantage of Selangor's experience. They could, for example, set up their regional headquarters in Selangor. And then from Selangor, they could go out to invest in other parts of Southeast Asia. They could go and invest in Laos, they could invest in Vietnam, in Indonesia, and so on. But because Selangor has the technical expertise, experience, the regional headquarters could be in Selangor.
Okay, so this year we have a regional comprehensive economic partnership we call as RCEP came into force, and so actually it's a free trade agreement, right, between the 10 ASEAN members as well as China, South Korea, and Japan, so off. So it is easily targeted as a largest trade bloc, comprising 30% world's population and also 30% world's GDP. So what do you believe this RCEP can benefit ASEAN, specifically for businesses?
Well, of course, again, all these free trade agreements, the importance is in the actual implementations or adoptions, right? You see, for example, RCEP will encompass large producers such as Australia. They produce a lot of agricultural items, food items, and so on. Of course, some of it could be further manufactured in Australia, but they could also be manufactured here in Selangor, for example, where, for example, the labor costs and various other associated costs could be lower than in Australia. And then the goods could be exported, I think, back to Australia, for example, or to the rest of the RCEP countries. RCEP, it has the 10 ASEAN nations. It also has China, the world's second largest economy, Japan, the world's third largest economy, Korea, and then, as I said, New Zealand and Australia. So we are talking about essentially the world's largest free trade area. So imagine, the rest of the world perhaps needs a bit of catching up in terms of signing on to the free trade movements. We saw, for example, the United States withdrew a few years ago from the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which was supposed to be a free trade agreement. So RCEP now should set an example for the rest of the world that free trade, free flow of goods, free flow of services, and I might add, free flow of personnel could benefit your economy, could grow your economy. And I think, for example, Selangor could take a lead in this. Already we have a lot of production of goods in Selangor. I think Selangor could emphasize provision of services. How could Selangor position itself as one of the major service providers in education, for example? There are a lot of universities in Selangor. How could it attract more foreign students? How could Selangor's university set up more branch campuses in other parts of RCEP? And also allowing free flow of personnel. If there are foreign experts who would like to work in Selangor, what kind of incentives are we having for these expats? And the experts from Selangor, how could they go to other parts of RCEP countries to share their experience to benefit these other parts of RCEPs? I think all these are equally important as production of goods. Yeah.
IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. It's an initiative by President Joe Biden and the United States. So how can Malaysia and also ASEAN realistically expect anything tangible for this IPEF?
Well, I will be very blunt about IPEF. I think the 7 ASEAN members, in fact, it includes most of the major ASEAN economies. When they signed on to the US-initiated IPEF, I think what they were expecting were mainly 2 things. Number one, more US investments into these ASEAN countries, not surprisingly. But number 2, also greater access to the US markets, namely lower tariffs for exporting goods into the United States and so on. So far, frankly speaking, we have yet to see the details of IPEF, especially, would it include the US government encouraging more US businesses to set up their, regional headquarters in Southeast Asia, or would it open up the US market more, and so we would like to see this sort of initiatives, but I think we really have to wait and see. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe you can share the ingredients to grow more of our own ASEAN multinational corporation to invest in the region.
Well, I think ASEAN is not a monolithic setup, right? We have some of the most diverse races and religions and cultures in the world. As I travel around the world, sometimes I'm really amazed with ASEAN. I've been to some parts of the world where people, at least to us foreigners, they appear almost very similar, but they will still divide themselves into different ethnic groups and so on.
Yes.
And very soon they would go into civil wars with one another. It is very amazing to me in ASEAN with such different religions and ethnic groups and cultures and languages and so on. We so far not only did not go into very serious wars with each other, but in fact, as we emphasize, we are one of the world's most dynamic and most vibrant economic zone, right? So how could we make better use of this? So for example, a Malaysian company which wants to invest in Vietnam or in Indonesia, well, number one, you need to learn more about the culture of Vietnam and Indonesia, right? And I might add, you should find your Vietnamese and Indonesian local counterparts and work together with them. And your products and services, it may still retain some Malaysian flavors, of course, but you need to adapt yourselves to the local ingredients and components, right? How to make it more Indonesian, how to make it more Vietnamese, for example. Only then, I think, would your business be more successful in its execution. Yeah.
It's called, the key word is the adapting, right? Adaptation.
That's right.
Adaptation. All right, so we understand that ASEAN has become the largest recipient for foreign direct investment, or FDI, in the developing world in 2019. So maybe you can share, how can we encourage trade between our own ASEAN countries? Since you mentioned just now, what are we lacking is the trade between our countries. So how can we encourage? Maybe there are steps for that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned we are the largest recipients of foreign direct investments and not largest recipient of foreign aids. We are not trying to beg for aids and so on. Now, as to this trade among ASEAN nations, I think standardization is very important. I think ASEAN should take better leadership in terms of trying to standardize the various custom procedures, the various what we call type approvals of appliances and other products. For example, if you manufacture some home electricals, such as fridge or TVs and so on, right? For sale, let's say you are manufacturing in Malaysia, but for sale in Indonesia, there should be better standardization between the two countries. If you manufacture according to these standards in Malaysia, then you can sell it directly in Indonesia without having to wait for more so-called type approvals and so on. So ASEAN should take better leadership in these standardization procedures, such that goods and services could be sold and used throughout Southeast Asians. The other thing is, of course, if you are individual business persons, you need to approach your counterparts in other parts of Southeast Asia. You need to be bolder in terms of making the first step outside your own country. If you are Vietnamese, you need to think about selling your products beyond Vietnam, but let's say to Indonesia. If you are Filipinos, again, you need to think about how could I sell my products to Thailand as well. This sort of attitude, and then to go indeed the first step outside of your country, I think it's very important for us to have a higher volume of trade among Southeast Asian countries. Yeah.
Okay, like I mentioned just now, ASEAN can be the next frontier of, in terms of economic growth, catching up with other Asians, with other countries. So maybe how can, what are the implications of US and China that can be benefit from Malaysia? Because we understand that big companies and or powers like US and China can be a battleground if we look at in the economies, right? So what are the implications that you can share specifically on Malaysia and its business?
Well, of course, the US-China very stiff competition is a reality which we could not run away from. And because, well, again, as I said, we are sort of the gateway between the East and the West. We are, in a sense, caught in between these two largest economies competing with each other. But sometimes, well, if we are not so humble about it, we could also reap benefits from these competitions.
We're looking at the bright side.
Yeah, of course. For example, there are American companies trying to relocate from China. Of course, Southeast Asia would be the next attractive destination. Similarly, Chinese companies which would like to relocate from the US, they could also come to Southeast Asia. It's closer to China anyway. We are not trying to, you know, like sort of steal business away from either China or US, but I mean, why not us? Because as I said, we are, I think, rated as the most economically vibrant region in the in the world, right? And but I mean, if you look at it more positively, also, Southeast Asia could, in a sense, be the bridge between the US and China. If they are not talking to each other, they are welcome to talk to us. And when they talk to us, we could convey what they told us to the other side, right? And in the process, if they could bring some business to us, it would be even nicer. So I think we need to look at this from a more positive perspective and try to make the best use of this situation. Yeah.
But however, we still have such platforms like ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF, and also East Asian Summit, AS, to discuss further about this, right? So there shouldn't be any issue, right?
Well, in the region, of course, there are disputes over the various claims on South China Seas and so on. But more or less, we will try to resolve these disputes peacefully. Those, for example, ASEAN Regional Forum, and so on. These are, by definition, forums. There's this notion of ASEAN centrality. That means when it comes to strategic and security issues, we should think of ASEAN taking the lead in trying to, if not resolving, but at least mediating in this regional security and strategic issues. And these forums are very important component to it. But on that basis, once we have more or less a stable and peaceful region, then how do you make business opportunities out of it? I think that takes the efforts of both visionary governments and also ambitious business persons. And our conference, namely the Selangor ASEAN Business Conference, I think is actually trying to marry the two, namely visionary governance or management and also the ambitious business expansions, for example. Of course, we would like more expansion into Selangor, but I think equally important is to see how Selangor businesses could be expanded to the rest of Southeast Asia, if not, you know, the rest of, for example, RCEP or the rest of the world. Yeah.
Okay. Continuing with what you said just now, how can you advise or encourage our local businesses in Malaysia if they intend to expand their business globally or in ASEAN? Let's start with ASEAN lah, instead of globally. So how can you encourage them or advise them?
Yeah, number one, as we said just now, you need to know the specific linguistic and cultural sensitivities of your target markets, right? Now, number two, as I said, a proactive government. For example, you could give incentives for your local businesses to expand beyond, let's say, beyond Selangor or beyond Malaysia to other Southeast Asian countries. For example, you could give tax incentive. And the incomes you make out of those businesses, you wouldn't tax them twice, right? Or you can give them loans, what we call import-export loans, for example. You can give them guarantees if they need such guarantee when they are investing in other countries. These are all governmental tools that the government could utilize. So it needs a visionary government, and I said slightly more ambitious business persons. Yeah.
All right. We have discussed a lot. Maybe before we end this session, what can you say to them and about this conference in general, and also what is your focus moderating this event?
Well, I think this conference will be a gathering of a lot of captains of industries from within Selangor, from Malaysia and the rest of Southeast Asia, and also the rest of the world. So if you attend this conference, you'll be able to exchange your views and ideas with some of these titans of industry. The aim of the conference, of course, number one is to attract investment into Selangor, but again, as I said, also to encourage Selangor businesses to step out of their comfort zones. So I think this is indeed very important. I mean, after the sort of pandemic and the attendant lockdowns being imposed upon us, it is time for us to really step out of our comfort zone, to try to explore new markets, to try to welcome new investors. And in this conference, hopefully we can achieve both these aims.
Hopefully we can make Selangor a better a better states in Malaysia. And with wait, before that, is it open to public?
I think so, but you need to do some registration before that. Yeah.
Registration. All right. If you want to be a part of the next economic revolution in the 6th Selangor ASEAN Business Conference SABC 2022 and to discover the most recent developments and as well as a way forward in vital economy, you can join the conference on the 6th of October at KLCC, KL Convention Centre, 9 a.m. So be sure to make yourself free and enjoy the conference. So thank you so much, Doctor, for joining this show. Hopefully we can catch up some other time. So that is all for today's Notepad. Until next time.